Welcome to The Rabbi and the Shrink. This is Dr. Margarita Guri, the Shrink, Dr. Red Shoe, and this is my favorite rabbi,
Yonason Goldson.
And today we're delighted. The rabbi found for us a really interesting ethicist. Her name is Jo Erven. She's a CPA with a bunch of creative energy. I know that's a category buster right there. I tease my daughter who's a CPA and she's actually very creative. But I'm allowed to tease on that. You've come by this world of ethicists and wrote a book, your third book, Becoming the Everyday Ethicist. Naturally, and I believe you were disappointed in how people were behaving and you were helping your clients. So welcome, Jo.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with both of you.
Well, we're honored. So please tell us about your mission. You've written 3 books. Tell us first about just overall your journey to do this.
So I think you hit the nail on the head. I was in corporate America for many years, seeing behavior that I didn't agree with. And I decided that the best way to go about influencing was to start training and talking about it. And, I'm a big proponent in changing one person's mind is good for the future. So I try to teach my way of ethics, of becoming the everyday ethicist, one person at a time to change, hopefully, society and organizational behavior. But 3 years ago is when my journey started, really. So it's been a whirlwind 3 years of teaching and speaking and writing, and I've loved every minute of it.
Well, you're taking the world by storm. Your first book was on total quality auditing, and I like that wherever you go, you bring clarity and some of your own something, your own auditing system, a proposition. You're creating systems that help us claim your clarity, because, that's a hard thing to do. And then the second book was, the second edition of it is Your Road, Your Choices, is more on self-development. I put the links in the chat so everyone can check them out and buy her book. Rabbi, what do you have to say? I know you were very excited about having her on.
Well, usually we have people who are in different areas and we look for ways to apply ethics to their particular fields. Having a guest whose field is ethics sort of moves us a step ahead before we start. So to recalibrate a little bit. But I remember something that one of my inspirations in the business, David Horsager, told me. He said that he talks about trust. He says, really, I talk about ethics, but it's hard to sell ethics because people either feel they don't need it or it's too late.
I think they're scared by the word.
That's what I was going to ask. Exactly. In other words, I think that many people don't have a definition. And they also have a sense that it's setting a bar too high for them. And therefore, they'd rather avoid the discussion altogether. So how do you broach the conversation? How do you sell the value of ethics to people who may not be so eager to buy the product?
Well, I actually have them acknowledge that right off the bat, because I think that's important and mind-opening. I do an ethics icebreaker. I have everybody really define what ethics means to them, which might sound like a silly activity, but it just gets their mind thinking, and they have to put something down. So I give a couple examples to, if they're totally stumped. I've had somebody write down that ethics is the most complicated, confusing topic that he's ever been trained on. And so I thought that was very opening to me, because it was this point where I could start to overcome some of his confusion and maybe help with that. So I think just by having people express what it means to them, it also shows me where they've come from. You get a lot of ethics is doing the right thing when nobody's watching, those kind of slogans that we've heard. But it really, to me, it helps frame the issue before we even start talking about it. and eases their mind a little bit. I say you can talk about trust, honesty, integrity. It doesn't have to be ethics. It can be character. I talk about our 3 character choices in life because I know that ethics word is a little bit scary sometimes.
And you have a
So
quote in
before
your
you
book
go
that
into the
says,
3, well, I'm sorry, Rabbi.
I was going to say that you have a quote in your book. I think it says that ethics may not be easy, but it doesn't have to be complicated.
Yes, that's
And-
John Maxwell. I'm almost 100%. One of the greats. So yeah.
Yeah,
And
and
your
I mean the
son, I
distinction.
thought, said it best. He said, if a squirrel is falling, catch it.
That's right.
And I love that with the little picture and the humongous acorns. You write very well, very compellingly. It was, I think everyone should read your book. And the rabbis, the Grappling on the Great, and mine on speakers, the everyday, the ethical speaker. I think that, so tell us about the 3 character choices, because you made a quote, even inconsequential things matter. Please talk to that and your 3 choices.
Sure. It started with my second book that you talked about. Your Road, Your Choices has 6 fundamental choices that I think we all have in life. And the 3rd choice that I happen to talk about is character. And so it came from that second book. And then obviously I wanted to expand that thought process in the ethics book. The 3 character choices, I have to give credit for the first character choice to David Brooks. So I'm gonna hold up the book I always hold up, The Road to Character. He, in chapter 10, the title of the chapter is The Big Me. And as I started thinking about this concept, he pointed out decades ago, people were more selfless. They put themselves last. It was all about the betterment of society and community. And I got to thinking, wow, there is a lot of big me examples I could use today. And so I just really grasped that concept. Whereas he goes kind of back in time. It's a great history lesson. This book, I kind of take it and run with it. And I talk about all the big me's that are out there every time we read the newspaper. However, the good news is, as Dan Ariely and other behavioral psychologists show us, that hopefully there's not as many bad apples or big me's out there. Most of us really lie in that middle character choice, which I call the ethical rationalizer. That is, just as small as, this big store makes enough money. I don't have to go back in and pay for this $2 item that they forgot to ring up. We rationalize so much of our behavior each and every day. And I called it the everyday ethicist because it is every day. Like you said, it might be seemingly inconsequential things, but I know that Yonason writes in his book that it's a slippery slope. And that is where the world gets in trouble. So obviously, the 3rd character choice is becoming the everyday ethicist, someone who doesn't compromise their integrity at any cost, who lives by the motto, silence is not golden. Those are just some of my favorite things to say about the everyday ethicist. So in a nutshell, those are the 3.
Kind of interesting that, and somewhat disturbing, more than somewhat. I've seen studies that suggest that people who call themselves ethicists tend to be less ethical than people who are average. And of course, definitely present company excluded. But it's, and I think, I can't remember, I heard this maybe from Jonathan Haidt, that the section of the library that reports the most missing or stolen books is the ethics section.
Wow.
So, there is this tendency that we have as human beings to intellectualize. And you're talking about rationalization. In my keynote, I talk about the 3 enemies of ethics. And the first one is rationalization. The more we study in an abstract sense, the more equipped we are to rationalize our way into unethical behavior. And so your formulation of the everyday ethics, which is our tagline as well, is taking those ideas and bringing them down into the practical. What happens when I get undercharged? What happens when somebody makes an error in my favor that goes unnoticed? It's those decision points that really steer us in one direction or the other.
Mm-hmm. Completely agree. It's the little things.
The scary part for me as a psychologist is watching people grapple with the gray, to take the rabbi's book. I see them encouraging others to be unethical. Here is pirated video. Here is, I got, Amazon sent me 2 of these. Here, have one, it's free. Things like that. I'm flabbergasted, actually, that people are, in Spanish, we call it flojito. They're soft on whether that's wrong. And I'm reading your book. I had an idea, and I don't know if it was brilliant or not, but at 2 a.m, it sounded brilliant. It was, maybe when we think of ethics as everyday, then people who think of themselves as special don't think of themselves as everyday. And so then maybe it doesn't apply to them. So for instance, in schools, you drop off kids and there's a lane to drop off. There's always someone who double parks there. And my mother would always say, ay, pobrecita, poor woman, she's so special. Meaning we have to be nice to her because she's special. She was actually saying this woman thinks she's too arrogant and we have to pray for her because she's missing the point of life. I mean, that was my mother's take on it. Instead of being sarcastic, she would have us pray on him and we would. So I have to laugh that pobrecita, she thinks she's special. Please comment on that. How do we get the point out to everyone that everyone's special and everyday ethics is for everyone and it's not a lowbrow thing?
Well, I think it all starts with us. I think that the one thing I leave my audiences with is you are not going to leave my session without your own personal value statement, ethical mantra, whatever that is. I actually can I grab mine to show you guys really quick here? I try to make it funny. So this is one of my favorites. Live so that you wouldn't be ashamed to sell the family parrot to the town gossip. Right?
Bravo.
Like, this is, you know, I always say, I don't care what it is, but I want you to frame it and put it on your desk. You know, to me, it's about, we are only in control of ourselves and our own, you know, I love the power of ethical management has a great quote in it that, you know, we may not have the power to change our circumstances, but we can change our own circumstances. I mean, it's kind of a circle, but I just think there's a real power in us each developing. Maybe it's our own special ethical mantra.
I think you're certainly right. Now, you've been showing everyone else's books. Here's your book. All right. I mean, you need equal time. Okay. I'm just saying.
I could start holding up mine too if you want.
You should.
I can do mine. I can do it too.
There we go. Actually, we should do a one with all of us for the same.
We do. We need a screenshot.
Of course, the people listening to the audio are not going to be getting this really, but
No. So those of you who are listening to the audio, we were basically all showing the book of Becoming the Everyday Ethicist. And then Joe, in a spirit of generosity, showed the rabbis grappling with the gray. So that's a good thing. I've just started reading Grappling with the Gray. I love it.
Thank you.
I've been
the idea that you're
cherry-picking
expressing,
it.
Joe,
It's very well done.
In Judaism, we have a concept called tikkun olam, which translates as repair the world. And we may have talked about this in the past, but it doesn't mean save the whales and save the snails and save the trees and save the bees. It means I am the world that I'm responsible for. And I am imperfect because I'm a human being, and human beings are, by definition, works in progress. And so I take responsibility for making myself into the best version of me that I can become. And that is the greatest contribution that I can make to the world, because the better I am, the better my piece of the world is. And it's not just for other people. Now I get to live in a better world. So it serves me as well. I like to say that being selfless is being selfish.
I think you hit, I mean, that's perfect. I have an entire stance. I actually call it pro-self. So being proactive, I think, is the most important thing any of us can do. And that's in my audit practice. I want auditors to become more proactive not reacting to what's happening at their organizations after it already happens. I want them to help them better to begin with. So pro-self is proactive, and selfish, meaning that make your own choices for you. And that's, I think that is how we can, quote unquote, change the world, perhaps one person at a time. So,
which goes back to one of the first conversations the good rabbi and I had, is that many people, and this is what we're all doing in our trainings, many people don't really understand their own values and ethics. They've borrowed them from someone else. And with any luck, they've borrowed them from someone wonderful and ethical, but often that's not the case, So it's interesting. Joe and I know a friend, Julie Thompson, who started the Auditing Alliance. And here's somebody who is doing what all three of us are talking about: take some action. But not everyone has to start their own organization to share educational moments and auditing best practices. What can someone do to be an everyday ethicist without being scared of this obligation? Where do we start, Joe?
Well, I think we're all challenged daily. And I think it can be as small as the oversight of getting the wrong change, or, not having the item rung up, or, the waitress or waiter leaving the drink off the bill and bringing it to their attention. It's just there. It happens. I'd say every day I have someone reach out to me and tell me a story about something that happened to them. Those are my favorite emails to open. And I think that people, after they start talking about ethics, they go to a good ethics trainer or hear a good speaker, they recognize it more. They see it happening in their daily lives. And I think that it all builds. So, I don't think they need to go out and start reading all these books that I keep holding up on ethics. I just think they need to start recognizing it. The first step to fixing anything is awareness of the problem. And there's a problem in society today.
I know that our listeners and viewers can achieve that. I think it's scary to have to think you have to be a rabbi or you have to write 3 books on ethics. I think the everyday little choices, I think that's something we can all do, including the little ways we lie on our taxes or lie to our family. Let's face it, many times we lie because we don't know how to say no comfortably. And so one of the things I do with my ethics training is teach people how to communicate. And the rabbi talks about it in his writings, ethical communication. How do you say something that's hard to say? You wrote something that hit me hard, the 7 deadly ethical sins of organizations. We've been talking mostly about individuals. Is this a good time for you to comment on the 7 deadly organizational sins?
Sure. I think that the book, Becoming the Everyday Ethicist, has 3 slices. We already talked about the 3 slices are individual ethics, leadership ethics, because I think we're all leaders in one way or another in our lives. And then huge piece of it is organizational ethics, because we all are part of some sort of organization. That could be the company you work for, an association. And what I did was essentially, there happened to be 7. I call them the 7 deadly sins, but it's things that I've been seeing over and over again happen. So, for example, one of the deadly sins that's out there quite a bit today still is the move fast and break things mentality. It has become this way of corporations, of big companies to say, let's move so fast that we may not even test things appropriately. We are not caring about people's data privacy or data security. They're worried more about their profits than their purpose. What is their purpose? Some of them don't even know their purpose. So really, to me, the 7 deadly organizational sins are mentalities that just keep recurring in society today. And I basically tell auditors and anyone else that reads the book just to be aware of them, watch out for them, start speaking up, start pointing them out. Another one is disingenuous leaders. That's a hard one. They could use your training on communication because it's hard to speak up. Another one of my favorite mantras, by the way, is always speak the truth, even if your voice shakes. Add your own. I read that one day and I thought, wow, so just a little extra sentence or phrase to always speak the truth makes such a difference. It acknowledges that it's hard. So I always tell people, when you're making up your ethical mantra, make it yours. And I think, like you said, a lot of people have borrowed it from someone else, but just make that tweak.
Well, the rabbi did a whole TED talk on that concept. That was one of our first discussions. We have something from Charlotte in our chat. When you say there's a problem in society today, is that in contrast to earlier on, or is it also still today? What do you both think of that? Joe first and then Rabbi.
So there's a problem in society today. Is that contrast to earlier times, or is it also still today? How are you guys interpreting that?
I think that's what she means.
Yes,
earlier times, earlier generations.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted too.
So here's the one thing that I've always kind of said. Could you imagine veterans coming home from World War I, World War II, and bribing to get into a college? No, they were just happy that they got their grant to go to college. And, you know, I feel like it really has been a shift to some degree. That's not to say that there weren't bad things happening decades ago. Maybe it perhaps it didn't come out as much back then. But I think research and studies have shown that there was a much more focus on society, other stakeholders than oneself. So now we kind of have this a little bit more self-serving beliefs and attitudes in society today.
I think that touches very closely to the core. In my book, Proverbial Beauty, I have a chapter on shame. And we tend to think of shame as something that's very negative. But the capacity to feel shame, what did Mark Twain say? Human beings are the only creatures that blush or need to. And our society is one, I mean, with the social media, there's no privacy anymore. There's no concept of a private life. We just put everything out there for everyone to see. And we can't be judgmental. I'd like to get into that because I know that's something you touch on in the book. If we're not making judgments and we're not keeping anything private, there's no sense of shame. And shame is it's part of our moral compass. If I have no reason to be ashamed, then why should I be concerned about anything I do, anything I say, or what anybody thinks of me? And I think that that's something that previous generations had. There was a reticence. There was a sense of personal privacy. There is a sense that I don't want to be perceived. So it's true, there were still people doing bad things. But at least there was a feeling as I can't tell everybody about it. I can't let people find out. And that at least kept a check on society. You brought an example in your book that I really wanted to get into, because this organizational idea that you mentioned that Airbnb, and I wasn't familiar with this, that they had encouraged customers or vendors to use tricks to avoid zoning and tax issues. Now, that in and of itself is not so surprising, except that what is the uniqueness of the Airbnb model? It's a whole industry built on trust. Mm-hmm. That's what makes it work. Why do I let somebody into my house? Why do I go into a stranger's house? Because there's a whole system set up to ensure that both the client and the vendor are trustworthy. And so the people who started the business, they have that mindset. How do you get the disconnect between that whole model and then unethical behavior?
They have the mindset when it benefits them.
Yes.
And I think that's where I try in my culture consulting to point out where they are living their own conflicts of interest. And I think that is that's what happens at a lot of those organizations.
So we have another comment from Charlotte that I think is noteworthy in terms of historical context. I think the focus has changed, she says. There were so many other unethical issues in generations past: Jim Crow, sexual harassment, child exploitation, just to mention a few. So with COVID, now I'm seeing an exacerbation of some ethical dilemmas, because there's a sense of fear and entitlement. And I think when we come from a place of fear and lots of change, we sometimes forget to consult our basic ethics or basic values, and we just want to survive. I'm seeing more and more companies getting sued because of sexual harassment from joking that was done from Zoom, because you don't have the same context. So maybe you get too familiar. There are a lot of issues to talk about. What are you seeing, Joe, as the trend now, as we're beginning, hopefully, to come out of COVID? What can we see in terms of the need for ethical understanding and ethical training?
Well, I think one of the most important things to recognize is where the problems have been. And COVID was the number one. The ACFE, the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, does the top 5 frauds in the year. And in 2020, COVID was number 1. And they listed, it's a very interesting year because usually it's one big scandal. So Wirecard was, I think, number 2, and that's a big accounting scandal that happened in 2020. So you normally see just one big company in the headlines. Well, in 2020, it was COVID, and it was a list of all the things that happened: benefits fraud, unemployment fraud, PPP loan fraud, telemedicine frauds, huge. So, I mean, the list has now grown to vaccine card fraud. So I think for me, it is awareness of it. I know that I am a huge fan of Dan Ariely because he brings to our attention that even students that are taking an exam, if they try to recall the 10 commandments before they take the exam, they may not even be able to list 10, but they list 10 of something, and the propensity to cheat goes down to 0% because they're asked to recall their ethics. I think that just being aware and reading about what's happening and the behaviors in society might serve to deter people from that behavior. They have that, maybe I was thinking as you were talking, Yonason, about the word accountability. We all have to hold ourselves accountable. And I think when we see other people doing things, we might really realize, well, we can't do that. We need to hold ourselves accountable. So, I'm going off on tangents, but they say the number 1 preventative measure for fraud is to talk about it. And so to me, I think we all need to start talking about it more. And I think that, that's maybe one of the keys. I don't know that that's going to stop COVID crimes if people continue to read about it, but I think, society needs to be educated on what's happening out there.
Well, and the good thing is the Rabbi and I have this basic understanding that we're never going to be out of ethical dilemmas. The answers aren't as important as asking the questions and pursuing it, because no one's perfect and things change. But we find that people are less comfortable talking about ethical dilemmas and how do you start it. So what's one last piece of advice? What would be the best way? Let's say I'm an employee or a leader or an organization. How do I start that uncomfortable conversation about exploring an ethical dilemma?
Well, I am a huge advocate of finding your trusted advisor. And I think that is huge in any dilemma, but especially in ethical dilemmas.
Yes.
That talking through it with you or Yonason, I mean, that anyone in your network that you trust, that you admire, that you respect, I think that's step number 1. I talk about that in facing and embracing adversity. Finding an advocate is one of my top steps. So I think that would be my first piece of advice when facing something.
The gurus all tell us we have to get out of our comfort zones, and we don't like to. Why? Because it's uncomfortable. Right? But having those uncomfortable conversations, as you say, Joe, is really what nudges us in the right direction. And you mentioned the 10 Commandments, which reminds me of one of my favorite stories. when my first year teaching with my wife, we were in Budapest, Hungary for a year. And we had a lot of kids who were just wonderful kids. My wife had one class of high school girls. They were just the surliest, most unpleasant group of girls. And on one occasion, she couldn't make class. She asked me to cover her class for her. And I thought, what am I going to do with these girls for one class period? So I walked in and I wrote on the board, it's okay to steal as long as you don't hurt anybody. And I asked them, do you agree with this? Well, took a minute or two to get to the English problem, the English barrier, but eventually the guy said, no, we don't agree with that. I said, why not? Oh, I was expecting your typical, it's wrong to do it, but they made it very easy for me. One of the girls said, well, it's in the 10 Commandments. I said, oh, you agree with the 10 Commandments? Yes. You follow the 10 Commandments? Yes. I said, all of them? They said, yes. Well, no. So which ones do you follow? Well, they only knew 2, which is not uncommon. So I wrote all 10 on the board. I said, well, which ones do you agree with? And so we spent the next few minutes going through the list, and we ended up with 6 that they agreed with. I said, so those 6 we have to follow. Yes. I said, okay, you follow those 6. I'm going to follow these 6. And I checked off 6 different ones. And they got very upset.
Of course.
I said, why are you upset? Well, you're a rabbi. I said, so you got to choose your 6. I got to choose my 6. So, but look at the ones you chose. You didn't even choose don't murder. You got to choose your 6. I get to choose my 6. I had them climbing the walls because they couldn't articulate a reason why I shouldn't be. And of course, because there was no reason why. Finally, we got towards the end of the class. I said, well, tell us the answer. I said, what's the question? And the bell rang, and I said, well, thank you, girls. And one of them said, well, you didn't teach us anything. I said,
you taught them more than they realize then. I'm sure many of them realize and remember now.
They will never
so.
forget that non-teaching them. Oh, that's wonderful.
We make these, again, it comes back to the rationalizations. It comes back to the double standards. We want other people to be ethical, but we've got a host of reasons why our ethical indiscretions are somehow defensible. And when we get called on it in a nice way, you set up a straw man, however you do it, then that at least gives us the chance to re-examine. Do I really have a sound defense of my own behavior? Or maybe I should take another look. What
I love that you kind of are hinting at a little bit, I feel like, or maybe I'm just pulling that out, is there is a reward for ethical behavior. And I'll tell a little story. So my brother-in-law, sister-in-law went to buy a lawnmower recently, a riding lawnmower at a store, a big store. And when they had the person load it into their truck, they realized that they loaded the model up from the one that they had just bought. And they sat there looking at each other. What do we do? Well, they know their sister-in-law teaches ethics, so I know what they do. So they told the gentleman, it happened to be a young kid who loaded it, and he said, "Thank you so much, because you just saved my job, because I made another mistake earlier today, and I really think I would have lost my job." And when they told me that story, I just got chills a little bit, because when you're rewarded for acting ethically, it makes you feel so good that you want to continue doing it. And I think that the more people, again, it's about everyday lives. We're challenged. How can you just, really grasp on to those good good memories, like your class, those good reminders that we've gotten throughout our lives, that acting ethically, that being the everyday ethicist, that making that good character choice is more of a reward than you can imagine.
If we can get that, it would help, because we all know that it's not always physically and fiscally profitable to be ethical. Sometimes it costs us money, time and energy, and all sorts of relationships to do the right thing. I do think, though, that kids have more of a sense of inherent fairness, but it's always skewed. So the problem is, even though they like the idea of right or wrong, it's often very skewed. If anyone's played a board game with a kid, they can see right away that the rules are applied in an interesting way. Learning how to be ethical without being ashamed or rewarding people when they say, oh, that was good. That's nice that you pointed out that your sister forgot her turn or whatever, things like that. It's very, very important.
Yeah, I'd like to go back to your story for a second, Joe.
To the point. Go ahead, Rabbi.
Yeah, just to, my father was very mathematically inclined, and he would always add up the restaurant bill in his head just to get an estimate of what it would be. And he actually learned that from his father-in-law, who was an accountant and did the same thing. And on one occasion, identified a big discrepancy in the restaurant's favor. So he was doing it as an exercise, but it was also a way of protecting himself. But many years later, I heard a story of a fellow whose father did the same thing. And his son asked him why he did it. And he said, because if the waitress makes a mistake adding up or recording the amounts, they could take that out of her pay. And so, your story of the tractor or the lawnmower, right? It's the same thing. It is by being disciplined in ensuring fairness, I protect myself, but I also protect others. Mm-hmm. And if I don't see that, if I'm not just doing it for me, but I'm doing it for the value of fairness, it turns it into a whole different exercise.
It does, when you bring other stakeholders into the equation. Absolutely.
And we applaud you for your books and for your mission and for your teachings and for your very kind and fun and relatable way of introducing ethics to even reluctant ethicists. And we're delighted. So, Rabbi, I believe it is time for the word of the day, sir.
Drum roll, please. You do that so well. I think you have to be Hispanic too. So we know what a miscreant is. It's a person of low character. But there's a verb, miscreate. And it means to produce in a way that is somehow defective. So we have mentioned numerous times the famous road that is paved with good intentions. And often when we have good intentions, but we are not disciplined in the execution, we aren't circumspective in looking at all the angles, that what we intend to produce ends up being damaged, defective, inadequate, or sometimes downright dangerous or harmful. That we want to be creators. It's really one of the tenets of Judaism, that human beings were created in the image of God, which means that we are partners in creation. And that means it is our job to create a better world, a more perfect world. And that requires good intentions, but it also requires that moral, that ethical discipline to have checks and balances, to have, what do they say? Don't always have a buddy system when you go swimming. Have a buddy system in life. Have people that you know have ethical sensitivity. Don't be afraid to ask others that you trust and are trustworthy. Right? Am I getting this right? Am I seeing the whole picture? Because in our subjective view, we will rationalize, we will convince ourselves of anything that seems to be in our own best interest. And in fact, we're not only hurting others, but we're hurting ourselves.
I love that word, and I think it fits right in. So, Joe, you've got lots to say. What is one final thing you want to say to all of our everyday ethicists out there?
Well, my motto is good things come to those who wait, but don't. You better than good. And I do think everybody deserves to live a better than good life. And I think one way we can all do that is by thinking about our decisions, our choices, our character, our ethics each and every day. So don't wait and start now.
I love it. Well, thank you, Joe, for sharing your wisdom with us, and anything we can do to support you in your mission.
Please
we
do
are
let us
here
know.
for you. Doctor, the last word?
The last word of the day is thank you, Joe. I think that you brought to life in a very human and easy to read way in your book, Becoming an Everyday Ethicist. The bottom line for me is what you said. If we just take a look at what it is that's happening, what we're doing, how we're contributing to it, what other people are doing. And if we don't know what to do, consult an advisor. I don't think ethics are complicated. My father would say they're simple, not easy. My father would say that all the time. And I think ethics are not simple. And as the rabbi talks about grappling with the gray, you have to be comfortable mucking around in the gray in order to see the light. And so my last word is ask questions, be patient, and you will be demonstrating that you are already an everyday ethicist. You can only get better if you keep trying. Those are my thoughts. Thank you, Joe, for having us on.
Thanks so much, Joe.
And you put us in a wonderful frame of mind by setting the tone, and we're just grateful. Thank you so much.
I'm grateful. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Rabbi, as always, you're the best.
Second best. You're the best.
Huh?
You're the best. I'm the second best.
Okay. Well, I thought I was right, but I'm wrong. So, okay. But we could be the co-best. And then you, Joe, could be the best. Besides the fun, we will see you next Tuesday at 12:30 for the Rabbi and the Shrink, Everyday Ethics Unscripted. You can find us in podcasts. You can find us in our YouTube and Vimeo. The Rabbi and the Shrink is our website.com. And our email is podcast@the Rabbi and the Shrink. Send us questions. See if you can stump us and invite us to help everyone explore things. Again, Joe, thank you so much. Rabbi, as always, be well, everyone.